One night over late dinner after Shabbat in Nabogoya village this summer, we asked our friend Rabbi Gershom Sizomu how the Abayudaya maintain their commitment to egalitarianism in a society so thoroughly imbued with traditional gender norms. Miriam, Elia, Shamir, and I were spending our second weekend in Mbale in eastern Uganda. Dinner had been prepared by women. Gershom's house and our guest house were cleaned by women and girls. But that morning, the Torah readers had been women and men. The service leaders, too, young men and women alike. Elia had spent much of Shabbat afternoon teaching two of the young people Torah trope. Females in this patriarchal country play domestic roles, but when it comes to Jewish learning, participatory tefillah, and ritual leadership, the Jews of Uganda are as committed to egalitarianism as we are here at Bethon. So we asked our friend how this came to be, and Rav Gershom thought about it for a moment and shared a story about his grandfather, the very first rabbi of the Abayudaya. It seems that in the early to mid-20th century, there had been a Ugandan cultural taboo against women eating chicken. Gershom wasn't sure why this was, but his grandfather had, in his day, permitted women in their community to break this taboo. In Rav Gershom's telling, this set off a chain reaction, and now women and girls throughout Uganda may eat chicken. So, whether Rabbi Samson Magombe gets full credit for the sea change, I don't know. It's not always so good to give Jews too much credit for things. But Gershom feels there's a through line between his own decision to nurture female participation and his grandfather's legacy. Samson made a choice to listen to women in his community and take their desire to be included seriously. Gershom did the same. 5784 was our year of during which we celebrated Jewish peoplehood. What might we bring forward into 5785? We call ourselves a chosen people, but I want to suggest that being part of Am Yisrael is as much about our individual and collective choices as anything else. To be chosen is also to choose, to answer the call of the covenant, and to stand with our Jewish global family. For the Abayudaya, their entire existence hinges on a series of choices made 100 years ago. In the 12th century, poet and thinker Yehuda Halevi detailed the conversion story of the Khazars in his Sefer HaKuzari. That story is largely lost to time, and scholars debate the historicity of that conversion narrative. The Abayudaya story, on the other hand, is much more recent, benefiting today from those who remember much of that history. It all began with one man, Semi Kakangulu, a noted hunter and tribal leader with vast holdings in Buganda, the largest kingdom in the British colony. Kakangulu and his followers practiced Malachite Christianity, his territory expanding and increasingly at odds with the British patrons. Kakangulu became a fierce anti-colonialist. His break from the British, though, was also a break from their Christianity. In 1919, after a period of self-imposed seclusion and contemplation, Kakangulu emerged with his copy of the Christian Bible in Uganda, ripped it in half, and discarded the New Testament. I like the first part, he seemed to say. Not so much the second part. He then circumcised himself, this is true, and his sons, for which Kakangulu was scorned by leaders of his former church who argued that this quote-unquote barbaric custom was practiced by those Jews who rejected Jesus. The story goes that Kakangulu stood tall and proclaimed, "If this is the case, then from this day on, I am a Jew, call me Mayudaya." There's a teaching in the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah that if one passes behind a synagogue and hears the sound of the shofar, he has only fulfilled his obligation if kiven libo, if he inclines his heart to the mitzvah. one must choose to be stirred by the shofar's call for it to count. Kakangulu surely was. With his passion and influence, his thousands of followers chose to take on the practices of the Hebrew Bible, but they had little to no knowledge of Judaism after Chorban Habayit, when the temple was destroyed and our people were scattered across the planet. The only thing they knew about rabbinic Judaism was what they could glean from anti-Semitic taunts of their colonial occupiers. They had quite simply never met another Jew. Their chief built a simple synagogue on a hillside where they could chant a long piece from Parashat Ha'azinu, Deuteronomy 32, in their native Uganda each Shabbat, followed by a great feast for the community. And he dedicated land that would one day become the synagogue where my family spent 2 Shabbatot this past summer. In 1926, the Abba Yudaya were practicing a version of biblical Judaism, observing major festivals, keeping kosher best they could, worshiping on Shabbat. Stripped of his titles by the British, Kakangulu still had vast land holdings, and it was a land dispute that brought him to Kampala, to the capital, where he met Yosefu, Joseph, a Yemeni Jew who frequented court sessions there. Yosefu was mesmerized by this powerful black African in white robes who proclaimed himself and his community part of the chosen people. He returned with Kakangulu to Nabugoya village and remained with the community for 6 months, sharing details about post-Bible Jewish practice and providing them with their very first Hebrew books. He taught them about bar mitzvah, about shechita. He taught them the alphabet and the names of the Hebrew months. One of Yosefu's students was a young man named Samson Mogumbi, Gershom's grandfather, who would become the community's leader after Kakangulu's untimely death in 1928 at age 59. Now, it was no given that the Jews of Uganda would survive their founder's passing. He was their primary benefactor, and none of his 13 children remained Jewish, succumbing to missionary pressures that provided education and upward mobility for Christians alone. But Rabbi Samson was a dedicated scholar and teacher of Jewish tradition. He further expanded the Abba Yudaya's knowledge and practice, receiving Jewish guests from India, from Israel, and other far-flung Jewish communities, even as his people remained desperately poor. The tyrannical and anti-Semitic reign of Idi Amin Dada severely depleted Jewish numbers, particularly after Operation Thunderbolt, when Israeli special forces rescued 102 hostages from Palestinian and German terrorists at Entebbe airport. Before Amin, the Jews numbered 3,000. By the end of his 8-year reign of terror, they dwindled to 300. In Devarim 21, the Torah mentions the enigmatic Egla Arufa ritual, the heifer whose neck was broken in response to a murder victim found in no man's land between towns. The elders of nearby towns approach a nearby stream and literally wash their hands of the crime. The Talmud in Masechet Sota asks, but did it enter our minds that the elders of the court are spillers of blood, that they must make such a declaration? Rather, they explain, it declares the victim did not come to us, and then we let him take leave without food, and we did not see him, and then leave him alone to depart without accompaniment. No, they're saying, we didn't kill him, the text implies, but we left him unprotected, unsupported, and alone. Still, we're not responsible for these things because we didn't know that he was in need. We didn't know that she was at risk. But when we do know, the Gemara implies, we must act. The bima of the synagogue in Nabugoya village is bedecked with Israeli flags. There's no question for them that a strong Jewish state is an essential component of global Jewish thriving, even as they fight against discrimination and for their full acceptance within that state. The Abba Yudaya stand with their people, and they hope we in turn will stand with them. In 1979, The young Jews of Uganda regrouped after Amin, and taking a page from their Israeli brethren, formed a kibbutz to ensure that all the members of the community would be taken care of. They wrote new music, including a tune for Psalm 130 that you may remember Rav Gershom teaching us on Zoom during COVID Rosh Hashanah 4 years ago. Idi Amin was overthrown just 2 days before Pesach. The Jews of Uganda came out of hiding, baked matzah, quickly prepared a Seder celebrating their liberation, even as we sat at our own Seders around the world celebrating Yetziat Mitzrayim. Like Kakangulu in 1919, the young kibbutzniks, including Gershom and his brothers JJ and Aaron, made a choice to invest in Jewish life in the most unlikely of places. These Jews by choice are a model for all of us. And I will say that what struck me the most when we were there was not the various ways that they are different, but the many ways that they are just like us. The Abba Yudaya are a model of conservative, traditional egalitarian Judaism in East Africa. They are learned and curious and passionate and communal. And just like Beth Am, they know the value of breaking bread together. Unlike Beth Am, though, they can never take food for granted. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah taught, Im ein kemach ein Torah. If there is no flour, there is no Torah. If there is no Torah, there is no flour. This aphorism is sometimes taught on behalf of philanthropy. Learning cannot flourish without material support, and that's true. But this summer, my appreciation for the relationship between physical and spiritual nourishment was enriched in Nagoya village. The community, now numbering 2,000 and growing, I helped to convert 3 young men while I was there, boasts 11 synagogues in the region. They survive mostly on subsistence farming, which means that they eat what they grow and not much else. And while the hill country of Mbale is blessed with rich red soil, malnutrition is still always a real danger. At Beth Am, we pride ourselves on offering a full Kiddush lunch each Saturday. But few of our congregants will lack basic sustenance if we don't provide bagels and salad and kugel. In Mbale, the Jewish community depends on the rabbi and the synagogue to provide meals, some traveling many miles to spend the weekend learning and eating and eating and learning. Here's what a Shabbat in Mbale looks like. Friday night, at the community central synagogue is a joyful affair. Young men hammer out Zulu rhythms on the djembe and other drums, while Rav Gershom and his brother Seth strum guitars, and women service leaders coax the congregation along with Grammy-nominated tunes, really, to ancient Hebrew prayers. As visiting rabbis, Miriam and I were asked to teach Torah whenever the opportunity presented itself. Kabbalat Shabbat being the first of numerous times that we did so. Of course, we didn't know we were doing so until Gershom picked us up at the border with Kenya and said, okay, so you're speaking tonight and you're speaking tomorrow. We worked a lot, but it was fine. After services, we made our way down the hill to the rabbi's home, where we dined with the community on rice beans, savory plantains, periwinkle, G-nuts, sauce, and small pieces of gamey chicken, which had been ritually slaughtered earlier in the day. After dinner, we thanked God for the bounty of our Shabbat meal. Shabbat morning brought more music, more prayers, more learning, and more food. After services, we adjourned to the generous shade of 2 enormous mango trees. The Abba Yudaya peppered us with questions about our sermons, about the Torah portion of the week, and with any Jewish query that was gnawing at them. We found their inquiries to be incisive and provocative, never shying away from life's big challenges. Lunch was served, every meal was delicious and more or less the same. Anything we did not eat was whisked away to be eaten by someone who was still hungry. Children lined up for treats after the meals, but they did so backward. By the way, educators, this is a good trick. I hadn't seen this. Backward, so that they couldn't game the system by running to the end of the line for seconds. Think about it. After a Shabbat nap, which we all needed, a smaller group reconvened for Talmud study. We circulated 3 tattered copies of the Vilna Shas, reading in the original Aramaic, with Rabbi Gershom helping his flock to decode the language. Readers took turn by age, from the eldest to youngest. The back and forth of ancient rabbinic debate stimulated further debate, until a treat of roasted G-nuts and these ground nuts, small version of peanuts but more flavorful, was distributed along with refreshing sweet tea. And as the sun set and the darkness descended, the assembled made their way down the hillside to the rabbi's house once more for Havdalah, Debbie Friedman's melody, followed by hours of waiting while a group of women lit the charcoal stoves at the outdoor kitchen and began to prepare our last meal, or our late meal. Shabbat in Uganda was like nothing I've experienced, and I think the rest of my family can say the same. The davening and the learning were rich and elevated by the palpable sense of gratitude felt by all for having enough nourishment to learn, and learning that accentuated the sanctity of each meal. Baltimore has its share of poverty and real food insecurity, of course, including in our own Reservoir Hill neighborhood. But it was watching Eliyah prepare food with the women in a smoky mud brick kitchen after Shabbat, Shamir the vegetarian observed with fascination the process of ritual kosher slaughter. I couldn't look, but he did. That really helped me appreciate how very much we take for granted. In Mbali, the Torah we learned was richer, sweeter, and more satisfying because we took none of it for granted. And the food we ate was made tastier and more fulfilling because the Torah we learned fed our minds, hearts, and spirit. Gazing out at the Ugandan hills, I thought of how humanity began right there in East Africa, hundreds of thousands of years ago. At some point, humans learned to harvest wheat and to bake bread. Learning and flour, my friends, are both elemental. They are the raw materials that make for human thriving. In eastern Uganda, my family discovered the best of that thriving. We found our people. I've been blessed to visit numerous Jewish communities around the world, and I'm always taken by the power of common belief, common practice, and common history. I've also worked with more converts than I can count, but I don't think I truly understood what it means to choose a Jewish life until I spent Shabbat in Nabogoya village. The Talmud asks us how we know if a potential convert is serious about the path before them. We say to her, "Why do you wish to convert? Are you not aware that nowadays Israelites are careworn, stressed, despised, harassed, persecuted?" If she responds, "I know, and I still feel unworthy," we accept her at once. I know, but I still feel unworthy. Yodea ani va'ani kadai. To be a choosing people, to quote Israel Zangwill, is to humbly meet the challenge of Jewish peoplehood. As we enter our new year, we might ask ourselves, what sort of Jews do we want to be? What are the assumptions we make about other Jews, and how might we challenge some of those assumptions? When we learn of Jewish communities in need in Israel, in Uganda, will we be stirred to their aid, insist on their safety? A number of you have asked if we can get to know Rabbi Gershom and members of the Abayudaya. I would love that, and perhaps there'll be an opportunity to bring them here to Beth Am. Some have asked if we can travel to Mbali together. I would love that too, and hopefully we can work that out. In the meantime, I know that tomorrow, when we stand to hear the shofar, across the globe, our fellow Jews will be doing the same. We'll incline our hearts to the sound and fulfill the mitzvah. Perhaps this year we'll listen even a bit more, straining to hear a distant sound from those with whom we have so very much in common. Shana Tova.